Thank you, Kathleen, and good morning, everyone. And thanks so much for joining us for this media availability. It's much appreciated. As you know, because Unifor has been saying this for some time right now, Canadian workers currently face an extraordinary economic crisis as a result of Trump's trade war with most of the world. The tariff war is designed to destabilize and damage global economies, and no economy is more directly impacted or targeted than Canada's. Trump's actions, whether they be executive orders, proclamations, investigations, or statements, amount to an ultimatum to businesses. Relocate production to the United States or face severe economic consequences. It is clear that President Trump is coming for our jobs here in Canada, with an eye on our critical resources and our very sovereignty. The president has made it clear that he thinks Canada shouldn't have an auto industry. He's also targeted our steel and aluminum sectors, and he's planning aggressive trade actions in numerous other sectors, including forestry, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, and others. This will cause significant damage to the Canadian economy. I want to be clear. Canadian workers should not suffer due to American trade aggression. Companies benefiting from doing business in Canada must not be allowed to relocate jobs without facing consequences for doing so. Our union has been clear from the beginning. Governments also cannot stand by and watch the Canadian economy be dismantled. We must push back to protect the interests of this country and all Canadian workers. We were encouraged by the federal government's imposition of strategic retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods. This was a deterrent to companies shifting production to the South. But now we must do more. I've written to the Prime Minister and key members of his new cabinet and asked them to take immediate aggressive action against corporations that move jobs out of Canada in response to U.S. trade policies. Unifor has proposed the federal government utilize existing powers under the Foreign Extraterritorial Measures Act, or FEMA, to penalize corporations that shift production to the United States. FEMA, as it exists, is an effective tool. Violations could result in up to $1.5 million in fines for corporations. This is indeed powerful, but we also think that FEMA can be further strengthened. Corporations need to understand that every move they make will have consequences. No company should have the false idea that they can move jobs south and then get a free ride shipping products back to Canada. With the House of Commons set to reconvene next week, we are also asking the government to consider legislative amendments to include heavier fines imposed on firms that shift production, the ability to seize assets of companies, as well as restricting imports from corporations and companies that offshore Canadian investment and jobs. This may sound heavy-handed. That's because it is. And that's because this is the fight of our lives. We must take a stand now, as the bleed has already begun. Fair trade is a two-way street, and companies that operate in Canada cannot for a second believe they can act with impunity for following orders issued by the President of the United States. If they act against the economic interests of this country, they must also face punishment. Along with my letter to the Prime Minister and his cabinet, we've shared a comprehensive legal opinion that outlines various options. We look forward to further discussions with the federal government on this matter. I want to thank you very much for joining, and now I'm available for any questions that you might have.
If anyone have questions, could you please raise your hand? Palak, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for taking our questions. What type of outreach have you done so far to MPs on bringing forward these amendments? And is there any party or MP right now taking up the offer?
Well, last week we wrote the Prime Minister. That was the first step. Obviously, this is a brand new government that we're dealing with, and we will continue to do outreach, not just with government MPs, but all MPs to make sure that there's a clear understanding here that the reality is we have to use every tool at our disposal in this country to make sure that we are protecting Canadian workers and their jobs. This is a powerful tool. It can complement the tariff measures that we've already taken. And we expect government, obviously, in the fight that we have right now with the U.S. administration, to not be timid and to use all of the tools that we have at our disposal to protect workers and their jobs.
Patty Handysides, go ahead with your question, please.
Thanks, Kathleen. Lana, what kind of penalties are you looking for shifting production across the border? Do you have anything concrete?
Yeah, I mean, currently the legislation can provide up to $1.5 million in penalties to companies. I think that that is clearly not going to be enough. When you think that this legislation was written many decades ago, it's time to update the penalty side of things. We can also use this in conjunction with tariff measures that we can take against companies that decide to shift production. Currently, we fought for a tariff remission plan, Patty, that would allow basically companies that build in Canada to be exempt from tariffs. And obviously, we think that that's important. It's using the carrot. But given the fact that we know many corporations have tariff mitigation plans on their boardroom tables right now, considering what they do with the tariffs that they're facing from the United States, we've got to use every other tool at our disposal to make sure that we're counteracting that and protecting Canadian jobs. And that if that means up to seizing corporations' assets, should they choose to shift their entire production south of the border, then we're going to have to look at all of these things because this is a fight like on any other that we've had in this country.
Patty, did you have a follow-up?
Can I ask a second follow-up?
For sure.
So, Lana, of course, we had that right away after the tariffs. We had the company in Windsor, the Tool and Die, that started to try to move things. It went to an injunction. It went to a court. Are you hoping that the government steps in so these kind of things don't have to happen at that point where, there has to be picket lines set up and, trying to blockade things in and going to court and things like that over seeing pieces move across the border?
Yes, I think it's really important that we use legislation so that workers do not have to fight back in this way. But we also have to consider that we are a union, so unions can do this, and we will continue to do whatever we have to do to protect Canadian workers, including picket lines or whatever other tool we have at our disposal. But the reality is, not every worker in this country has a union, and we need government to step up and stand up for all Canadian workers, and this is one of the ways that they can do that.
Natasha, go ahead with your question, please.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for taking our questions. I was wondering, has FEMA ever been used before in the way that you are proposing? And if so, could you elaborate a little bit on that?
It's been used twice before, and we can obviously have our research director talk to you about this at the end. But the legislation itself was designed, when when the U.S. was taking sanctions against Cuba, and the Brian Mulroney government introduced this legislation to make sure that Canadian companies were not obeying the U.S. directive, and that they were indeed, being fair to Cuba in this case. So I believe that it might be a novel way of using this legislation, but we have legislation, and we should be using it the way that we need to right now, given the trade aggression that we're facing from the United States. This wouldn't be used on its own. We also have obviously the tariff measures that we can take ourselves, but the reality is that this is such a serious problem right now. And every single day, we are going to see corporations making decisions that are not going to be in the best interest of Canadian workers or the Canadian interest itself. So we have to make sure that we're prepared to use whatever tool we have at our disposal to make sure that we're protecting.
Natasha, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, yeah, thank you so much for that. And similar to what Patty was asking, if the federal government is not willing to use this legislation the way that you have outlined, what will you do? You know, what cards do you have left to play?
I mean, we'll keep talking about this because we think it's important that the government is showing the strongest hand possible to the United States and to corporations operating in Canada. We cannot be in a situation where we are watching jobs leave this country because of trade aggression from the U.S. And so there are any number of things that we can do as a country. Using and utilizing this piece of legislation is one of them. But we think it's a powerful tool, and we think it can be used to send a message to corporations that you just don't get to shift production south of the border without there being punishment or penalties for doing that.
Thank you. Widdy, please go ahead with your question.
Hi, yes. Thanks for taking our questions today. I wanted to understand, obviously we know about the corporation in Windsor, and there was an announcement from Honda, they're going to delay some investments. But do you have any more idea of any such announcements coming up from companies who are looking to do this, and how many sort of number of jobs may be on the line, or some sort of data of that sort?
Well, first of all, I think if we don't send a message and draw a line in the sand, we're going to see a lot more job loss in this country. So that is key right now, that we're doing everything possible to protect the jobs that we have. We have seen a number of companies, for example, in the manufacturing businesses across Canada, whether it's a furniture making company in Delta, BC, others in the province of Quebec that have shifted production south of the border. We received a notice last week of a manufacturing company here in Ontario that is looking at shifting equipment and jobs out of Canada into the US. It is literally a weekly kind of concern right now in terms of what we're hearing across the uniform workplaces. Obviously, our members are on high alert. Our locals are on high alert to make sure that this isn't happening. But the longer this goes on and the longer these tariffs are in place, the more of these kinds of decisions you're going to see. And that's why it's important that the Canadian government and provincial governments are sending a strong message to corporations operating in this country that you don't get to appease Donald Trump's unfair, unwarranted, and in our opinion, illegal trade tariffs by shifting our jobs south of the border. This is the fight of our lives, and we have to use all measures at our disposal to make sure that we're protecting Canadian workers.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing. I had a follow-up. So, in terms of your next steps, what are you looking at? Like, are you hoping to set up meetings with the ministers or the Prime Minister himself? And also on the provincial front, what kind of more support are you looking from the fourth government or the provincial leaders?
Yeah, obviously, we think that this is part of the general discussion that we have been having and will continue to have with the federal government in terms of the types of actions that they need to take. So that will carry on. It will carry on in terms of our conversations with MPs from all federal parties. This was the defining issue in the federal election for a reason. It's because Canadians are extremely worried about their jobs, and obviously we need all governments standing up for those jobs and pushing back as much as they can. I think the other thing is that we have to to have very hard conversations. If I was a premier of a province right now, and we had companies making announcements around delaying of investments, or a cancellation of shifts or a moving of equipment, you want to be making sure that you're bringing these corporations in for a meeting very, very quickly, and making sure that they understand that there are also actions that provincial governments can do, and I encourage provincial governments to make sure they're doing everything possible working with the federal government to protect Canadian jobs here, because the reality is, if we don't draw a line in the sand right now, we are going to lose manufacturing jobs and jobs across this country because of the aggressive tariff and trade actions that the US president and the US administration has taken against Canada. And all we are saying as a union is we can't be timid, we must be bold, and we must be aware of every single legislative tool that we have, in addition to tariff tools that we can be using to protect Canadian workers. We can't obviously stand by and watch any more jobs or any more corporate decisions being made that are adverse to Canadian workers and Canadian jobs.
Alec, you have another question? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to get others in on this question as well, maybe the research director. How does the union envision the enforcement aspect of this request playing out? And has Unifor done any analysis on things like the admin cost or something like that? Yeah.
No to the second one. To the first one, clearly what would have to start happening is an investigation. So that will need to occur, but we already do this under legislation. For example, when we have to impose tariffs or take those kinds of measures, we have an ability to be able to investigate and look at companies who are doing things in that regard. So there shouldn't be an impediment here in terms of using this legislation, investigating what corporations are doing, and making sure that we are protecting the interests of Canadian workers. But I will also ask Angelo to chime in here as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for the question. I guess what's interesting about the FEMA, and to an earlier question about how often it has been invoked, and again, it's only been a couple of times. The actual legislation contemplates this exact sort of scenario, and there's a copy of the legal opinion that has been circulated, and what you'll see referenced in that, and the purpose of the FEMA is for the federal government to effectively prohibit businesses in Canada from complying with measures which are very broadly defined, what a measure could be, that is taken by a foreign state that adversely affects Canadians' interests on international trade, commerce, and infringing on Canadian sovereignty. So it's like, it's not been used in the context of a trade war. There hasn't really been one. And so it's almost like this is in some ways tailor-made to the situation we face now. There is a big role for the Attorney General to play in this process, also for the Minister of Foreign Affairs to determine what measures will constitute action under this legislation. So as Lena said, there's an investigation process and that discussion process. This could also be very targeted to individual actions of specific companies. In this case, could be specific to individual actors, but it could also be broadly applied to entire sectors or subsectors in terms of what the punitive measure will be in the form of what's referred to as a blocking order using FEMA powers. So that is essentially how this has to work its way out. As Lana said, these powers exist. We think they should be stronger, and so that's strengthening the legislation means passing a new bill in the House of Commons. But if the government chose to act, they could do that fairly quickly. So hopefully that spells it out a little bit more for you.
Thanks. David Kennedy, please go ahead with your question.
Thanks for taking questions. First one's just a really quick one. You mentioned the $1.5 million penalty. Just to clarify, like that's the maximum penalty that a corporation could face for leaving. For instance, GM picks up stakes, they face a $1.5 million fine. That's the max.
Under this legislation currently, that's the max. That's why we're saying that one of the amendments, David, to the legislation would be to increase the penalties with respect to the monetary penalties, but other things as well, including the ability, if governments needed to seize assets here. So there are any number of powers that this legislation can be used for. But what I would say to you is the legislation is old; it hasn't been updated, and that's what needs to happen right now is to make sure that we're strengthening the power that we have.
All right. Do you have a number in mind that a corporation could face or should face? A company that is an order of magnitude larger than $1.5 million, for instance. It's, a pittance for a number of corporations to pay.
Yeah, I mean, in my estimation, I think that there should be levels of penalties that can be applied here. And I would say to you, I have not settled in on a number, but it has to be much larger than $1.5 million. That's for sure.
Okay. Thanks. And just one more while I'm at it. I'm just wondering, both Prime Minister Carney and Finance Minister Francois Philippe Champagne, when GM came out and said they were going to cut a shift in Ottawa, warned of consequences. Obviously what you're proposing would be consequences for, in an action like that. Have you actually seen any from the federal government at this point, following that decision in Oshawa?
Yeah, well, a couple of things about that, David, is that for sure, I think the consequences they were referring to is they would have to review at I think by June, late June, the tariff remission exemption that had been given to General Motors and to other automakers that build in Canada. Many of them are not facing obviously tariffs given the exemptions that were applied. If you build in Canada, you don't face retaliatory tariffs, which our union, as you know, advocated for. Secondly, when it comes to General Motors, obviously, there is a substantial footprint that General Motors still has in Canada. We are working with the company right now, as our collective agreement allows. We have a 6-month period here to be able to work with them to try and get a change in that decision, to do whatever we can to mitigate job loss there. And we'll be using obviously all of the power that collective agreement gives us in our conversations with GM, which are ongoing right now. So I would see that as a different situation because we are ourselves taking action. But obviously, we could be in a different place in 6 months from now, depending on what decisions get made by any corporation in Canada. And that's why it's important to make sure that we are flushing out and using all the tools that we have at our disposal to push back against corporations who currently in the auto sector and many others are looking at all the ways that they can mitigate this tariff from the United States, and what we're saying that can't be done on the backs of Canadian workers.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Okay, seeing no more questions, I think that will bring us to an end. Lana, did you have any final remarks?
No, just to say thank you very much for joining us. And obviously, this is a new element to the conversation on how we fight back against the U.S.'s aggressive trade policy on Canada. And there's a lot that we can do as a country. And this is one of the things that we're going to have to consider right now, given what we're facing from the United States and given what's at stake. Jobs and the livelihood of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Canadians are at risk right now. So we must be bold in our response to that.
Thanks, Lana. I believe I forwarded the legal argument document to the people who have registered for this Zoom call. If you have not received it, please reach out to me and I will forward it directly to you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a good day.